My name's Nat. Today is Thursday, and today we are looking at the myths surrounding autism. This is a big subject, and we only got time for a handful of myths, but I try to pick myths which aren't maybe as common knowledge as some of the others. We're going to look at what's true, what's not true, what could be true, what might be true, what has been true, what is no longer true. Autism is a funny one because it's always changing, moulding and evolving. All the myths we're going to be looking at, they are slightly true, but slightly doesn't mean true. As you may have gathered, today we're predominantly focusing on autism, forget the others. However, myths surround all of it. We did a similar webinar a year ago called Neuromyths, and that was a bit broader. Today we're narrowing it in a bit more. Here's me. Got a master's in neuroscience. We did a whole module on neuromyths. That is where I'm drawing a lot of my knowledge from today. We also have been looking at some interesting books that I will reference later on, academic studies. As I was saying to my colleague Tim a moment ago, if you disagree with my facts, they're all referenced, so do check them out. Autism myths. A myth is normally a long-held belief which is false. Whether or not it's something which was true, which is no longer true, or was true and the facts have been distorted. I've got a little picture of a fairy there. I personally do believe in fairies. But there's things like unicorns, which you wonder where they came from, or jackalopes. Jackalopes are actually one of my favourite animals. They're rabbits with antlers. These things, they all come from some sort of story, myth, old wives' tale, and things in science are by far means no different. They also come from little kernels of truth, but over time, a little bit of whispers, they change, they grow, they morph. Sometimes a popular book or a blockbuster film can change the course of history to our collective understanding beyond recognition. And quite often, we already know the truth, but we have to peel back the onion layers before we can remember what it was that we originally learned. Along that time, we are also learning new information. Autism is a really interesting one. Depending on what generation you're all from, I guarantee the word autism, Asperger's, functioning levels, syndromes, disorders, differences, depending on where you were born, what era you grew up in, your gender, all these different factors, we probably already have a very different understanding collectively between us all. April says, the graphic of the headphones reminds me that not all autistic people like using them. They might not like the pressure of the headphones, or the ears, or the headphones, or the sensory issues. Yeah, absolutely, April. Not all autistic people like listening to the same song on repeat. Autistic people like wearing headphones. Some do, some don't. Not all autistic people are obsessed with rewatching the same films again and again. Personally, I like to have a nice broad view. Not all autistic people like to stim, which is when you move around. It's so easy to pigeonhole people. As we've learned in our pop culture series, the media is forever perpetuating a singular idea of a type of individual. Why? Because they don't have much time to get their ideas or their jokes across. So often we are just used as a cheap gag, which seems harmless enough, but when you look at the broader picture of things, then there starts to be less and less visual representation of what something truly is. Is it really the case that most autistic people are incapable of sitting quietly in a cinema, as it implied by the use of the term autism-friendly cinema screenings? That is a very good question. Of course not. Some people can sit very comfortably on their tushy for an hour or two. But autism-friendly screenings are less to do with sitting still and more to do with sensory information. Cinemas are unnaturally loud and they can cause a great level of distress for those with autism. By lowering the volume a bit, it makes it more a pleasant experience. Sometimes when it is completely dark in the cinema, that contrast between light and dark can also be very distracting, disorientating, and unpleasing. By raising the lights a little bit, it can make it a more comfortable experience. Of course, not for everyone, but I think they try to be as inclusive as they possibly can. That being said, why do they assume all autistic people are unemployed? Because these screenings are never in prime time. They're always at the most obscure times. While I commend the fact that we have autism-friendly screenings, it's also not that inclusive. But yeah, great point on that. April says, as an autistic person, I like using headphones because they drown out unwanted sounds. I used to not like the old Apple AirPods because they felt uncomfortable. but I like the new ones because they were designed to fit better in the ears. That's also a really good point because you have multiple factors to consider. Tim says it's also possible to get custom ear fittings. Yep, for a small cost. This is a good book I recommend. It's called Unstrange Minds, and it's remapping the world of autism. Why I like this book is, yes, it has lots of facts, it has lots of myth busting, but it's also a kind of an autobiography. It's not your standard cold, dry, non-fiction book. It's actually a really interesting way it maps what we know about autism in relation to a real person's life. I think that's why it says a father, a daughter, and a search for new answers. It's a nice book, which is very digestible and easy to follow. Just one example, but worth a shot. Oh yeah, Kim says also for sensory information, same in supermarkets. Yep. For instance, we worked with suffrages and they also have autism-friendly hours. Yeah, for me, I personally hate supermarkets with a passion. I have to do it weekly like everyone else, but it's just so overwhelming. There's so much colours and text and information. My brain is trying to digest everything. Not so easy. Let's kick off with some questions. What autism myths have you heard of? Throughout your years on this earth, are there any things that have you heard time and time again that you either know aren't correct or you're not so sure? Maybe these are things that your parents taught you, you heard in the playground, or maybe things that you once believed yourself. Vaccines cause autism or worsen it. What a lie. Yeah, that was widespread. People weren't getting vaccinated for mumps, measles, rubella, like everything. No relation. However, people still think that. Autism is a superpower. That's an interesting one because it's used as an empowering statement, but can also be quite damning. I have gone through a bit of a journey, seeing autism as negative, seeing being told autism is a superpower, to hating that autism was seen as a superpower, to actually thinking, if some people think that, it's actually okay. There are strengths and challenges, but just like all superheroes, we all have our Achilles heel. If it was all sunshine and rainbows, this webinar today wouldn't exist. It's a spectrum after all. But it's not a spectrum in terms of A to Z. It's more three-dimensional. A matter of intelligence? Yep. It's not. Yeah, we know that. Refrigerator mothers? Oh, you're hugging your child. Not enough. Your kid's going to get autism. What a load of coswallop. Autistic people can't be empathetic? Wrong. We can be empathetic. It's just we display empathy in a different way to you. There's this old theory called theory of mind, and actually it's quite outdated because it looks at autistic people as the other and rather having the empathy that maybe we see the world different. Rain Man is the standard. Don't get me wrong, what a great film, but it did stigmatise us forever. Automatic low IQ? Of course not. But yet some people think all of us are a little bit simple. Not the truth. Autistic people take things really literally. We often do. But it's not that we don't understand jokes. It's that our brain processes jokes in a different order. Some things we'll find hilarious and other things we will not. It's why when you're watching series, we all laugh at different points. It's also one of the reasons why don't shoot the messenger. I love watching Friends. I hate the flip and laugh soundtrack. Stop telling me when I should find something funny. I find things funny at all different points. The Good Doctor is another standard. You know what? I haven't actually watched the series yet, but I am curious to see how they represent it. Handicapped. Can't make eye contact. Yeah, we're not like witches where you make eye contact us and we melt away. It can be uncomfortable because that's a lot of sensory information to be processed at once. Autistic people are mute. Some people are, some people aren't. Some people are selective mute. Louisa says, my local cinema promotes their autism-friendly screenings as ones where audience members are free to wander around and react to the film as much as they like. Personally, I would find that infuriating to have my enjoyment of the film spoiled by such distractions. I think that's why we have them as autism-friendly screenings, because you know what you're getting yourself into. If it was a regular screening, that would be annoying to a lot of people. Then again, as an autistic person, I would benefit from the sensory considerations, but I would also dislike people walking in front of my screen. You can't please everyone. Autistic people can't cope with change. We typically struggle with change, and the reason for that is the world is noisy, smelly, disgusting. There's a lot of things going on in this world. And because we have to use extra processing power to navigate, it's like pulling ourselves through rope in a clouded environment where you can't see. When things are in change, our mind is reading everything, so it's draining. We can cope with change, but change management has to be done in the correct way. Autistic people only want to do boring, repetitive work like software testing. That is a stereotype that people have fallen into. When it comes to all autistic people want to work in tech, it's like the chicken and egg situation. Do we all want to work in tech? Or is it that because people think we want to work in tech, they make tech more inclusive, which then makes it more approachable to those with autism? Boring is relative. It depends what you think. For some people, having that consistency, that continuity, that kind of binary process can be very comforting. For other people, it can be infuriating. Where do people learn about autism? All of you have spoken about all these myths that simply are not true. But we had to learn them from somewhere. Where are we getting our information from? Genuinely tell me, what are we doing? Are we reading the Flippin' Sun newspaper, going on Reddit? Maybe we're getting a talk? Oh my God, some of the ADHD stuff on TikTok is getting a bit ridiculous. Information is everywhere. But what can we trust? Can we trust academic papers? Yeah. But can we trust how we interpret those papers because they're not written in an accessible way? Probably not. Just because something is from an official source doesn't mean that we are going to take away what they intended. Yeah, Tim says whatever TV programs are on at the time. Yep. Autism and TV shows, we have always been used as the butt of joke. Let's think Sheldon Cooper. While not officially autistic in the series, let's face it, they definitely modelled it on that. Social media, TV, friends, family, Read, YouTube, personal diagnosis, word of mouth, Monk. I like that particular series. But yeah, we form our understanding from what we're exposed to. This is why autism looks so different around the world, because people have different exposure. In some cultures, witchcraft. In other cultures, genetic disease. In other cultures, genius, superhero, supervillain. Otherwise, quirky, funny, best friend, loner, sociopath. Depending on what we're exposed to, our initial thought of what autism is going to vary quite a lot. Autism does change a lot. One thing that a lot of you haven't put, which quite interestingly, is the old SM, Manual of Mental Health Disorders, or the ICD, the way that we diagnose these conditions. Depending on what year, they're very different. Currently, we've got the old dyad of impairment, which essentially social communication, repetitive behaviour, and social sensitivities. When those two overlap, we've got autism. But prior to that, it was the triad of impairments. This is when we had 3 different things that make up autism. When we come up with an updated version of something, are we saying that the previous version is wrong, or just outdated, or an alternative perspective? There are some people who actually think that we've gone backwards in our understanding through different renditions and versions. An example is in 2018, where we removed Asperger's as an official diagnosis. Some people miss it and actually say it was a useful part of the spectrum to understand autism. Progress doesn't always mean a good progression, but it doesn't have to mean the opposite either. The truth is, if we can't even trust manuals, if we can't even trust academic papers, how are we going to know what's true and what's not true? Or when we're looking at social media or TV, you've got to ask yourself, where are they getting their information from? When they're in the writer's room, are they going through journals? Or are they just thinking, oh yeah, I know that about autism? There are some shows which might have an expert on board, but the vast majority will not. Some common myths which come up time and time again is autistic people use only a small part of their brain. Essentially, we've got a whole brain here, and the reason why we aren't showing the whole spectrum of emotions in a way that you deem correct must mean that there is a part of our brain which isn't being fully activated. Of course, it's a myth, but people think that. This myth is actually rooted into a myth we've spoken about more widely previously, the 10% myth, that we only use 10% of our brains. If we only unlock the rest, oh my God. But now that myth has been purely debunked, people still think that if we give the right support and training to people with autism, that we're able to unlock the part of the brain that has been laid dormant. Not true. Autism is caused by hemisphere imbalances. We've got our left hemisphere, our right hemisphere, and when they work in perfect harmony, we've got a fully functional brain. But if one hemisphere is overly active and the other one is having less attention, autism. Not true. Not to do with hemisphere imbalances, as we will break down soon. Autistic individuals have low intelligence. No. Do people with low intelligence have a high likelihood of being autistic? Yeah. But are autistic people more likely to have low intelligence than the general population? No. Just like anyone, it can vary. However, our intelligence does normally seem different. Where those without autism will have more of a potentially well-rounded intelligence, those with autism will normally have a particular area where they put all their eggs in one basket. They might be experts in a particular area, but may struggle. An example is, I suck at quizzes because my general knowledge is a bit meh. But if you have a quiz on, say, the Beatles, I'm going to get every question right. It depends how we define intelligence. For those who have been in previous sessions, we talked about how the brain processes information. Those who do not have autism typically have what we call a top-down approach, where you take the overall gist and then you get down to the nitty-gritty. Where those with autism typically have a bottom-up processing mind, where they go right to the details first, and only after then do they start branching out. It's not a wrong way of processing, it's a different way of processing. The lost systems and processes we've created in our world are created with that top-down processing in mind, which can mean when people want you to come up with general trends, a good overview, that's when we may struggle. April says, the small part of the brain myth reminds me of the myth that 25% of the energy we use come from our brains. Yeah? Louisa says, in the early noughties, there were much more hype about reducing autism symptoms by following a gluten and casein-free diet. Luke Jackson was one of its advocates. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Personally, I was and remain skeptical that changing my diet is going to cause the scale to fall and to read non-verbal communication just like that. Do you know what, Louisa? We're actually going to talk about diet as we go on, but yeah, it's an interesting one. People did think diet had a really big impact on autism. It has a really big impact on your overall health, but not autism. Autism kids can't thrive in mainstream schools. Do you have autism? Yes, no. If yes, all right, special needs school. It's not like that. Diets can cure ASD. Being a veggie, being on gluten diet, being on, I don't know, all the different fads doesn't cure autism. It might impact your energy levels, but it's not going to suddenly give you neurotypical abilities. Let's look at this 10% myth again. The wider myth is that we only use a small part of our brain, but related to autism is that autistic individuals are locked in their world and they only use part of their brain. People sometimes have thought autism is like a vegetable potato, but we don't have access to the fullness of all our intellect. Not true. This idea that intelligent people have access to a wide variety of their brain has been pushed forward in different films for ages now. The heavy metal cause is popular again at the moment. You do find that with a lot of myths. They go through different phases of popularity. Another example of that, if only we could harness the full potential of our entire brain, is through the film Lucy. Okay film, but not accurate. I want to say in German, I'm not sure, but the tagline here is, we only use 10%. What if we could use 100%? That similar idea has been put to those with autism for a lot longer. Have you heard of it? Never heard of it? If you haven't heard of it, good, because it's not true. What about some of these myths? Are they true or are they not true? These are wider brain myths. We got damage to any part of the brain causes effects. If we had a damage, do we automatically get autism? Yes, no. The answer to that is, yeah, any damage will have consequences. There's the famous instance of Phineas Cage, who had a big pike through his eyeball and pulled it out. He was fine, but he wasn't. So does make a thing. Evolution supports the 10% myth. Not at all. We've always used our whole brain. The fact is, we just don't know much about the brain in terms of when we are looking at the way the brain lights up through scans, our equipment just isn't that good yet. The brain is active in all areas. It is, but there is much higher activation in other areas. Yes, there are parts of the brain which are the primary hub for, say, communication, but that's not to say that the other areas aren't in use. We don't fulfill 10% of our potential. Meh, again, not true. Tim says, overclocking anything means that it does not last as long. That is true, actually. Those who do have access to ridiculously good memory do tend to have shorter lifespans or other health complications. April's heard of this, but haven't heard of the film Lucy. Yeah, anything with Scott Hansen is great, but more or less. Another myth is autism is caused by an imbalance between the brain hemispheres. Remember, our brain is split up into two big old chunks. Those chunks are joined, and a lot of people think they're not joined. They are joined. You know how you might say you're a right brain thinker, a left brain thinker? Those think that autism is because our brain isn't communicating between both hemispheres correctly. As you may have guessed by today, not true. If you were to have a guess, put a little pin on the hemisphere that you think is more likely to be the autistic hemisphere. A lot of it comes down to how we communicate, which comes round to our prefrontal cortex, so the front bit of the brain. That goes across both hemispheres. This is a trick question, obviously, because it doesn't have any relations to what size of the brain. But how do we know that? We know that because when we do some scans of the old brain, we can see that there is activation on both hemispheres. Yeah, there might be slightly higher activation in certain areas for different tasks, but it's not enough to say that maybe we have a strong left hemisphere, more likely to be autistic. It simply does not work like that. Both hemispheres in the brain are active in autistic individuals, just like they are active in non-autistic individuals. Our brains look the same and they do work more or less the same. Yes, things are connected a bit different and the way we solve information is different, but we still have access. Looking at it from, say, the London Underground, it's that while we may take different journeys to get to places, we still have access to the entire underground in order to navigate it. It's not like we only have access to the DLR. We have access to everything. We just may take slightly different journeys in order to get to where we want to get to. An example of how autism varies is this illustration. When we think of autism as all the same, like we're all like carbon copy clones, not true. Autism is the most generic kind of label you could possibly give someone. All it is saying is that you have some gene mutations that are really common. In terms of understanding what autism is, needle in a haystack, everyone with autism is completely different. For instance, maybe on this one, this gene is slightly different, and this gene might be slightly different. As a result, you have this type of autism, this type of autism, this type of autism. With someone with autism, they might not like being in noisy cinemas. For someone else with autism, maybe that doesn't affect them. The reason why it varies so dramatically is because it is a big kind of cocktail of slightly different gene mutations. People think that autism is like, oh, I've got a bit of autism here. It doesn't work like that. There is no such thing as an autism gene. Autism is many things. And that is one of the kind of big misconceptions that we're still learning a lot about at the moment. As to what autism is and where it comes from, it's also not black and white. While there is 100% a genetic element to autism, there is also an environmental element to autism, where you grow up with, different pollutants, your early years in your mother's womb, your family inheritance. Here's another classic one. Autism children can't learn in mainstream schools. Did any of you who have children who have autism, did you ever have that kind of conversation? Oh, should I put them in a special needs school? Are they going to be okay in mainstream education? The idea that it is a simple answer. Remember, if we go back to this one, okay, this screen, should my autistic child go to a special needs school? How could you possibly know? Because every single person with autism is so vastly different. This is why people talk about the spectrum being all over. Should all autistic people go to special needs schools? Are we all going to struggle in mainstream education? You can't possibly say. There's this outdated view of the autism spectrum where it's literally one end to the other end, and it's either you're neurotypical, no problems whatsoever, or you're low functioning, not able to speak, can't live independently, and people think it's like you're on some sort of scale. It is not. Again, think of it like a three-dimensional globe where you might struggle with communication, but you might be really great at analytical thinking. You could struggle with independent living, but you might be really amazing in science. It can vary. It could be that on some days when you are feeling calm and collected, finding certain social tasks really easy, and on other days when your social battery is completely drained, you struggle. The autism spectrum is real, but what people think the autism spectrum is the thing that is severely outdated. April says, as an autistic learner, I was in mainstream classes but had one-to-one support. Yeah, same here, April. That was also a perfectly fine way of doing it. I'm actually glad I went to mainstream school, because I wonder if I went to a school that had too many support rails, that maybe I wouldn't have been challenged effectively. But that might not be true for everyone. Autistic kids can't learn in mainstream schools. Yeah, okay, true, depends. Yeah, I would say it depends. Or maybe I'd say it's because I'd say anyone can, but like April mentioned, if you have one-to-one support, you absolutely can. The idea of being segregated has never really sat right with me. I fully appreciate for some people, maybe you do need the extra help. But in the real world, we are mixed. Shouldn't we be training people to navigate the world as it is? Not in this clinical kind of classroom setting. I think this is potentially quite a contentious subject, and maybe some of you have different opinions to me, and that's completely fine. I think one-to-one support is crucial, but also eventually you're going to have to leave school, and eventually you are going to be in an environment where you have all different neurologies and neurotypes. This is an interesting one around whether it's a myth or not, because in the DSM, they have levels on autism, like level 1, level 2, level 3. But in the ICD-11, which we typically use in the rest of the world, we don't have levels. Is one a myth? Or are they just different approaches? Are they both autism, or is it because there's slight nuances that they're actually different conditions? You can see where it can get a bit confusing. Oh, Tim says, are those with higher support needs more likely to have other conditions alongside their autism? Are they more likely? That is a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that, but the broad answer is those with autism are very likely to have co-occurring conditions. Are they more likely to have them? Maybe they are more likely to have occurring conditions which might have higher support needs, because maybe their higher support needs are because of underlying conditions. But in terms of the stats around that, I'd be keen to know. Moving sharply on, autism can be cured with education and adjustments. If we have the best education in the world, we've got Mary Poppins on steroids. Can we cure autism? Can we get rid of it? Maybe we've got some assistive technology. There you go. Have some headphones, or maybe some additional time. Maybe having a checklist. Maybe having some fidget toys. Maybe having lights that can be dimmed. If we have the right adjustments, can we eradicate autism? Spoiler, no. But while you cannot get rid of autism, you can minimize the negative effects that being autistic in a neurotypical world can have. For instance, if you're calm and you're collected, you have your sensory toys, you have all your support needs to help you along, autism doesn't go away. But the negatives that are associated with having autism in a world that isn't designed for your mind can start to diminish. Imagine physical health. Does a wheelchair stop you from allow you to walk? No, it doesn't, but it does allow you to navigate the world in an alternative way. Autism can be cured with education or changes. This comes down to what we actually think autism is. In your opinion, is autism a neurodevelopmental condition or is it a disease? If it's a disease, diseases are things that can be cured. Diseases are things that are not natural, things that we do not want, and things that we are going to do everything in our power to find ways to get rid of. But autism isn't a disease, and very few people would think that. It is a neurodevelopmental condition. It's something which is related to the brain and develops very early on in life. It is something which is inherently part of you. You don't stop being autistic. When we break it apart, it's not a disease, so of course it cannot be cured. It's like saying, oh, you're a funny person. Can we cure that funny bone of yours? No, it's part of your personality. It's who you are. Yes, it can evolve and change over time in terms of how it presents itself, but it doesn't just go away. April says, I once had a PE teacher who referred to my autism as an illness. That teacher is ignorant and honestly shouldn't be in education. That brings us to a wider issue about how much training do people get around autism in schools? Very little. Here's some more images of classic stereotypes of things that may support autism. We're on to the final hurdle. Diets, supplements, or brain exercises can cure autism. We've already established that you cannot cure autism. But why is it that people think with the right diet, with the right kind of limiting of this and that you can get rid of autism? Do people think that if I have a couple of multivisits, that suddenly the challenges that I have previously faced will vanish? It's interesting to think why these come from. A lot of the time, it's really bad advertising. Have you ever heard that you can cure ASD or other neurodivergent conditions? I'm curious to know, what have you heard that can cure it? Are there any kind of remedies or things that people have told you that, hey, just try this? It's worked for my son. LaDonna says, do they really think that, or are they trying to sell us something? That is the truth, because with multivitamins, a billion-dollar industry flying off the shelves. But I've been taught that the percentage of vitamins within multivitamins are so minor that they basically have hardly any effect. That why if you've got a deficit in a skin vitamin, that you'll go to the GP and they'll give you a much higher dosage of something. But yeah, I do think a lot of the time, like the ADHD medication in America particularly, is worth so much money. I'm not saying the medication isn't needed and isn't helpful, but it is definitely a for-profit industry. Turmeric. Never heard this. Change the brain physically, tablets. Yet there is no medication for autism. Those who have medication is typically related to anxiety, which is an effect of having autism in a world which isn't for autistics, but there's no medication for autism. Electric shock, yeah, people used to think and get rid of it. Believe it or not, it actually had more harm than good. Now, electric shock therapy, there are some instances where it has shown to have positive side effects. But when we're talking about electro, we normally think about this traditional approach of like being hooked up. Removing metals at birth, tablets, behavioural therapies, change the brain physically. There are so many things. None of these work. Truthfully, if they did work, you wouldn't be the same person. I'm trying to think of something out. Imagine, okay, I don't want my child to be born blonde. If we get rid of the metals, if we electrocute someone, if we give them different therapies, if we give them tablets, it'd be barbaric and totally ridiculous. But because our understanding of autism, people think it is a disease and not a neurodevelopmental condition, even if it's subconsciously, we think that some of these things could help. Some of these things may help diseases, but they certainly do not help neurodevelopmental conditions. Tim says, this alternative theories tend to focus on the assumption that there is a root cause that can be targeted. Yes, they are looking for that autism gene. We know, don't we, that there is such thing as an autism gene. There are lots of changes, but there isn't one sole gene. Autism is incredibly vague and broad. It's like saying a needle in a haystack. You try and treat the whole haystack in order for that one needle. It's not an effective approach, and also it simply does not work. Some other neurodevelopmental conditions are like ADHD, central auditory processing disorder. Our brain functions in very different ways. None of these things can be cured. We can have support strategies which can make it easier to navigate the world we live in, but that doesn't get rid of it. Even if it did get rid of it, that isn't something that I don't think anyone would want. When I hear people saying, I want to get rid of my autism, what they're actually saying is, I don't want to be treated the way I am being treated. If you were treated kind and with love, I would be surprised if many people would want to get rid of it. Is ASD, autism, caused by modern life factors like screen time? Do you spend too many times on the TV, playing too many video games? This is one of the latest things, that children who spend too much time on the TV or too many times playing video games are more likely to develop autism. Yep, you're starting to get it now. False. People believe it. When we struggle, when things are hard, we look for answers. Without getting too philosophical, that's why religion exists. Because we like having answers to things we don't have answers for. Autism is one of those things that we still know very little about. Of course, we are going to be looking for anything that can help explain it. It's why the refrigerator mother first came about. Autism, I don't know how to explain it. Bad mum. Again, it was created by males. A lot of the people who blame video games and TV are often those who don't actually play them themselves. They're trying to compare themselves. What is different from me to you? That difference must be the thing, which is why you have X and I do not. Autism is caused by lifestyle factors like screen time. No, autism is actually a number of things. So it could be the environment when you're in your mother's womb and kicking about. It could be parental factors. Does it run in the family? It could also be genetic, heritable factors. It could be tiny chromosomal changes on a very large number. In terms of what creates autism, it is many different things, and there isn't one sole thing which is or is not autism. Autism is super complex, and it is a combination between genetics and environment. We don't know a lot about it, but we know that at least. There is zero evidence that technology causes autism. If you are born autistic, That being said, getting support can definitely help you. This is why getting a diagnosis early on is really important, because those early years where you are developing are absolutely crucial. Like I said, there's a nugget of truth in some of these myths, but they have normally been exaggerated to the point where they are no longer functionally useful. What caused it before then? Before we realised it was external factors and genetic, it was witchcraft, it was dropping someone on the head, it was the devil. Everything has been blamed for autism in the past. In more recent years, people thought it was like one piece of your DNA was the reason that you are autistic. Before, they would say it is blamed on upbringing, blamed on family, blamed on pollution, blamed on smoking. People like to find simple answers to complex problems. When I say problems to them, not because it is a problem. So let's do a quick recap. Let's see if we're all on the same page. Left if it's a lie, right if it's true. Autistic individuals have low intelligence. True or not true? Autistic people only use part of their brain. Autism is due to a hemisphere imbalance. Autistic kids can't succeed in public schools, and diet or exercise can cure autism. Okay, let's come up, and they're coming in. Autistic individuals have low intelligence. Some do, some don't. But it's not related to autism. I'd say no, but maybe I'd probably put it in the middle, because you can and you can't. It's not like a blanket approach. IQ tests are, as we've talked about previously, are and famously not a great depiction of intelligence. They look at a certain type of intelligence. Even while that might be in the middle, I still think that's problematic. Autistic people only use parts of their brain. They use the whole part of the brain. It's just they use the brain differently to how normal people do. When they are doing scans of the brain, there are going to be different elements of activation. Autism is due to hemisphere imbalances. Nope, we use both hemispheres. Autistic kids can't succeed in public schools. No, they can. Some might find it easier in SEND schools. Others might actually benefit from public schools. Others might need a more of a hybrid approach. Diet or exercise can cause autism. Nope. No evidence. Diet can have a big impact on, for instance, ADHD. There is a big correlation between how it can help you manage some of the symptoms and characteristics, and the same in autism. Louisa says some autistic kids might not succeed in public schools in the British sense. Yep. Succeed is another key word there. And in the British education system, different cultures will have different approaches. So good one for pointing that out. Tom says, in public schools, bullying goes wild without any checks. Yeah. Is it more the bullying which creates a problem rather than the education style? Is it the way we teach kids? There are too many factors. But what we tend to do as a society is we like to blame the other rather than putting the emphasis back on us. What can we be doing better, rather than saying what the other person isn't doing right? The last question I want to find out is, why do people believe these myths? We're not dumb. We do have this information available, but why do so many people believe it? While going through today, I'd be surprised if any of you were like, wow, I had no idea about this. We do know a lot of these things, but yet these myths continue. How can we stop them from being passed down from every generation? If we want our kids to feel empowered, then they have to believe in themselves. The current myths that are going around are not going to make us believe in ourselves. When I was younger, of course I believed these myths, because these were things that were just always spoken about. I remember people talking about saying, oh, has Nathaniel had the injection? Is that why he has autism? I just like, okay. Insta Reels. Yep, a lot of the time Instagram is like the Wild West. Lack of accurate information. Simplification is preferable. I think that is a very strong answer. Even when we look at academic material, we like to simplify it to the point that it's no longer factually accurate. Stereotypical representations in media. Yep. Because who wants a well-rounded character? You only got 20 minutes in a show typically for the sitcoms. We like to believe that there is a reason that we are being told something. If people believe that myths about vaccines causing or worsening autism, that myth might have been created to protect them. It's true. Some people don't want to take the risk. If I take the vaccine, there may be a chance. If I don't take it, there's no evidence to link those things together. Perhaps people don't think deeply about things. Yeah, could be that. They got other things to think about. They don't know no better. See, I would challenge that. I think they do know better, but maybe it relates to the fact that they don't give it enough time to really evaluate it. You can resonate with things that are not true. Yep, or we want to believe things that aren't true to exclude them. I personally think a lot of it comes down to the ever-evolving landscape of what we know autism to be. 100 years ago, autism wasn't a thing. Bad parenting, it was genetics, it meant you were dumb, you would get euthanized, get electric shock therapy. There was a hierarchy between Asperger's and classic autism. This is an example of the things that used to be considered autism, which no longer are. Our understanding of autism is developing at such a rate that the general population can't keep up with it. The average person isn't an expert on autism, nor do they want to be or should they be. But when I speak to my mum, she still refers to it back in the day because her knowledge hasn't been updated. We tend to anchor ourselves to certain moments in time. As we get older, our plasticity, our ability for our brain to form new patterns, to reshape our long-term memory, to update it, becomes more and more difficult. Things that were believed to be true and no longer are true are a lot harder to internally update. This is why one of the reasons why younger people tend to be more informed. They aren't having to rewrite things, they're just having to learn things from the beginning. Some key takeaways is that myths aren't complete made up. They always come from some truth. Peeling away what that actual truth is can be challenging. We know that most myths do come from scientific sources, but what happens is that an article will be published, then a newspaper will take the article and do the headlines, and someone else will read that headline and just take away the key information. Before long, it does get diluted. Do shape our evidence standards. We go out of our way to look for evidence to back up these myths, which can lead us down the wrong path. Some myths, which aren't really myths, were true, but have since been debunked or updated. Maybe that newer information isn't widely accessible. When you type in autism in Google Images, you'll get loads of the triad of impairments. But nowadays it's a dyad of impairments. But because the triad has been around a lot longer, that image is much more available. When people are doing their presentations on autism, they'll get the first image they find. It's very easy to keep pushing old thoughts and knowledge. If you go on our website, we mention Asperger's quite a lot. Not because it's a relevant term anymore, but because it's a term that people are familiar with. Myths are incredibly hard to change, and our understanding of autism is evolving much quicker than our ability to reshape, reform, and readjust our prior understanding. Louise says, some people claim that fatty eating habits are caused by autism. If that's so, how did autistic people survive during World War II rationing? World War II was a bad time to be autistic. We talk a lot about Jews being executed, but honestly, those with autism got killed a lot. Here's a quick library if any of you want to take this information and learn more about it. But there are lots of information that talks about dispelling myths and looking at them one by one. I can't go into more detail now. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more about autism that we haven't had the chance to even talk about. I'm curious to know, are there any other areas that you would want to learn more about? Are there any other myths that you want busted? Do you think AI will increase or perpetuate myths? It comes down to the data that we input it. If any of you who use AI at the moment will know that it likes to hallucinate. It all comes down to the amount of information available. Let's say we've got up-to-date information, which is about that much, but we've got this amount of information, which used to be considered true, but is now outdated. AI will be training more on the outdated information. I would say if you don't know how to use AI effectively, then actually it could be perpetuating these myths further. Good question though. Time will tell, but I am worried that AI is advancing faster than people are able to learn how to use it effectively. Okay, interesting. Just to end up on, if any of you are autistic or are neurodivergent and do want support in the workplace and want to better understand it, you can get a workplace needs assessment in the UK. These are one-to-ones where we give you a nice detailed report of how your brain works. We focus on adjustments of what would benefit you rather than generic, this is more tailored towards you as a person, which tends to be a better approach. Do we really have superpowers? Isn't it unhelpful to overhype our abilities? I completely agree with you. When we put ourselves on a pedestal, we end up going too far in the other direction. Why do we have to be either exceptionally abled or completely disabled? Why can't we be in the middle. That's what I was assuming with AI, but yes, we will see. If you do want to catch up on today, then you can check out our YouTube channel. This is a nice thing. Lots of lovely videos. Do check them out and do hit that subscribe button. It means a great deal to us and makes us feel loved and valued. If you do want to contact us, I'm in at exceptionalindividuals.com, or if you want to email me directly, it's nat@exceptionalindividuals.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, any follow-ups from there. One last question. Why is autism considered a category in the Paralympics, but ADHD is not? Good question. Do you know that dyspraxia used to be in the Paralympics and then they got rid of that as well? It all depends, I reckon. Does the disability impact your ability to perform certain sports? My guess would be that while ADHD can be challenging in certain areas, it can be advantageous, potentially too much. For instance, Simone Biles, one of the most decorated Olympians of all time, has ADHD, and no one would consider her as disabled. Disabled relates to the circumstances you find yourself in rather than whether or not you are or you aren't. Maybe autism in certain sports could be seen as a disadvantage if paired up with those without autism. Truthfully, I don't know. We're all done, everyone. We have wrapped up another Thursday webinar. I hope you found that interesting and got a few gems from it. But as always, keep testing your knowledge. Some of the things I said today, who knows, might not even be true in the future. This is why it's so important to keep our knowledge updated and to keep learning. Belinda says, thanks so much, Nat. Amazing what I've learned here. You are all amazing. Thank you. April says, that question made me think of Simone Biles, who has ADHD. Talking about that part in the Olympics, I saw her take part in the gymnastics in this year's Olympics. She's got a new documentary on Netflix at the moment, which is actually really interesting and a good insight. All right, everyone, let's call it quits for the day. But hopefully I'll see you next week. But have a good rest of your Thursdays and lovely having you all again. Bye.